It's 2 in the morning and you're lying awake staring at the ceiling doing mental math that makes you want to throw up. You got paid 5 days ago. 5 days, and somehow you already have $143 left in your checking account. Rent is due in 2 weeks and it's $200. The car insurance payment hits next week, that's another $180. You need gas to get to work. You need to eat something that isn't ramen. You start playing this horrible game in your head. Which bill can you delay without getting a late fee? Can you skip lunch at work for the next week? Maybe you can tell your friends you're sick when they invite you out this weekend because you absolutely cannot admit that you can't afford a $30 dinner. Not again. Not after you just posted on Instagram about being grateful and blessed and living your best life. And here's the thing that really keeps you awake at night. You're not even doing anything crazy with your money. You're not buying designer clothes or taking expensive vacations or going to clubs every weekend. You're just trying to exist. Buy groceries, pay rent, keep the lights on, put gas in your car. Normal stuff, boring stuff. And somehow you're still constantly broke, constantly stressed, constantly doing this mental math at 2 a.m., wondering where it all went wrong. Sound familiar? Because if you're nodding your head right now, you're not alone. 60% of Americans would go into debt if a $1,000 emergency came up tomorrow. $1,000. That's not even a real emergency. That's a minor car repair or an unexpected medical bill or a broken appliance. Things that will inevitably happen to everyone at some point. Meanwhile, you see people your age posting their third vacation this year, driving cars that cost more than you make in a year, living in apartments that look like they belong in a magazine, and you're sitting there thinking, what am I doing wrong? Are they secretly rich? Did they inherit money? Are they just faking it with credit cards and drowning in debt behind the scenes? My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about money and why some people seem to glide through life financially comfortable while others work just as hard but never get ahead. If you've ever wondered what wealthy people actually do differently with their money, and more importantly, how you can start doing the same things today regardless of how much you're currently making, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if you're tired of being broke and ready to understand how money actually works. Now, before we get into the specific blueprint that wealthy people follow, let me tell you something that's going to sound almost too simple to be true. The 1% aren't using secret investment strategies or insider knowledge that regular people can't access. They're not gambling on cryptocurrency or day trading stocks or doing anything remotely exotic. The reality is actually way more boring and way more accessible than you think. They just follow a very specific blueprint with their money, and here's the part that should make you pay attention. You can follow this exact same blueprint starting today, even if you currently have $143 in your bank account and rent due in 2 weeks. Let me paint you a picture of what being financially illiterate actually looks like in real life, because this is where most people are operating whether they admit it or not. You have some vague sense of how much money is in your checking account. Maybe you check it occasionally, probably right after payday when the number looks good and makes you feel briefly optimistic about your financial situation. Then you just start spending. Coffee here, lunch there, maybe you buy some new clothes because you deserve it after a hard week at work. A few drinks with friends because you can't be the person who always says no. Some random stuff on Amazon that seems important at the time. None of it feels expensive in the moment. It's all just normal spending. Normal life. Everyone does this stuff, right? Then 2 weeks later, you check your account again and the number is terrifying. Where did it all go? You genuinely cannot account for where several $100s disappeared to. It's just gone. Evaporated. You start getting that low-level anxiety that sits in your stomach all the time when you're broke. The anxiety that makes you avoid looking at your bank account because knowing the exact number somehow makes it worse than just having a vague sense that things aren't great. This is what I call financial autopilot, and it's exactly how the majority of people operate. They're not tracking anything. They're not budgeting. They're not making conscious decisions about their money. They're just spending until the money runs out, then they panic and cut back until the next paycheck, and then the whole cycle repeats. I know someone who lived like this for years. Smart person, good job, decent income, but somehow always broke, always stressed about money. and he could never figure out why because he wasn't buying anything crazy. One day, I convinced him to track every single expense for 30 days. Just write down every dollar that left his account for 1 month. He was shocked, absolutely shocked at what he discovered. $680 on food delivery in 1 month. DoorDash, Uber Eats, Postmates. He genuinely thought he maybe spent $100 a month on delivery. Turns out he was ordering food almost every single day because he was tired after work and didn't feel like cooking. $680. That's over $8,000 a year on soggy fries and lukewarm burgers that he barely even remembers eating. But here's where it gets interesting. This is the exact same person who would spend 15 minutes searching for a coupon code to save $5 on a purchase. He'd drive across town to save 10 cents per gallon on gas. He thought he was being careful with money, but he had absolutely no idea he was hemorrhaging $8,000 a year on food delivery because he never actually tracked his spending. This is step 1 of how the 1% manage their money, and it's so simple that people almost dismiss it. They track everything. Every single dollar that comes in and every single dollar that goes out. They know exactly where their money is going at all times. Not approximately, not roughly, exactly. And I'm going to challenge you right now. For the next 60 days, track every penny that enters your account and every penny that leaves. Use an app like Mint or Personal Capital. Use a spreadsheet. Use a notebook. I don't care what method you use as long as you actually do this for 60 consecutive days, because here's what's going to happen. You're going to discover that you're spending money on stuff you didn't even realize you were buying, subscriptions you forgot about, impulse purchases that seemed fine in the moment but add up to hundreds of dollars a month, food delivery, coffee, random Amazon purchases, all the little stuff that individually feels meaningless but collectively is the reason you're broke. When you track your expenses, you can usually cut your spending by at least 10% just by eliminating the stuff that doesn't actually add any value to your life. That's not about depriving yourself or living like a monk. That's about being intentional instead of operating on financial autopilot and then wondering why you never have any money. And here's what happens when you actually start paying attention to where your money goes. You free up cash. Maybe it's $50 a month at first. Maybe it's $200. Whatever the amount, this is where wealthy people make their next move. And it's the move that separates people who can handle life from people who get completely destroyed by it. They build an emergency fund. And I know this sounds boring compared to investing in stocks or starting a business, but stick with me because this is where things get real. Let me tell you about someone I know who learned this lesson the hard way. She was 26, working a good job, making decent money. She had a car payment, rent, student loans, the usual stuff. She was managing fine, not saving much, but keeping up with her bills and living a relatively normal life. No emergency fund, though, because she figured she'd start that eventually when she had extra money lying around. Then her transmission died. Just completely gave out. The repair shop quoted her $1,200 to fix it. She didn't have $1,200. She had maybe $300 in her checking account, and payday was a week away. So she had a choice to make. Fix the car and not pay rent, or pay rent and not fix the car. She chose rent. Seemed like the logical choice, right? Can't get evicted. But here's what happened next. She couldn't get to work without a car. She lived in a city with terrible public transportation, and her job was 15 miles away. She tried to explain the situation to her boss, tried to work from home temporarily, but it was a job that required being physically present. After missing 3 days of work, they let her go. No job meant no income. No income meant she couldn't pay the next month's rent either. She ended up having to move back in with her parents at 26 years old, start over with job hunting, and deal with the psychological damage of feeling like a complete failure. All because she didn't have $1,200 saved for emergencies. $1,200. That's it. That's the difference between handling a problem and having your entire life fall apart. This is why every wealthy person I know has an emergency fund of 3 to 6 months' worth of expenses sitting in cash. Not invested in stocks where you'd have to sell at a loss if you need it quickly. Not tied up in real estate. Just accessible cash that you could get to immediately if something went wrong. When you have an emergency fund, that check engine light that comes on in your car shifts from being a potential catastrophe to being a minor inconvenience. You're annoyed, sure, but you're not panicked. You're not doing mental math about which bills to skip. You're not calling family members to borrow money. You just handle it and move on with your life. The psychological benefit of this cannot be overstated. You know that constant low-level anxiety about money that just sits in the back of your mind all the time? The anxiety that wakes you up at 2 a.m. doing mental math about bills? That goes away when you have an emergency fund. You sleep better. You make better decisions at work because you're not constantly stressed. You're more patient with the people in your life because you're not operating from a place of fear. And I totally understand that saving 3 to 6 months of expenses sounds impossible if you're currently living paycheck to paycheck. Start with 1 month of expenses, then work toward 2, then 3. This might take you a year or 2 years or longer, and that's fine. The timeline doesn't matter. What matters is that you're building this foundation so that when something inevitably goes wrong, you can handle it without your entire life imploding. 8:15. 10:45. But here's where things get really interesting, and this is the part where most people start leaving absolutely massive amounts of money on the table without even realizing it. Once you've started building that emergency cushion, wealthy people make their next move. And it's probably the closest thing to a financial cheat code that exists in the real world. If your employer offers any type of retirement account matching, you take it. Not think about it. Not put it off until later. Take it immediately. And let me show you exactly why this matters so much by telling you about someone who didn't. I had a coworker a few years ago. Smart guy, college educated, working a professional job making about $60,000 a year. The company offered a 401k match where they would contribute dollar for dollar up to 5% of his salary. Do the math on that. If he contributed 5% of his $60,000 salary, that's $3,000 a year. The company would match with another $3,000. That's $6,000 total going into his retirement account annually. I asked him one day if he was taking advantage of the match. He said no. He needed the money now for bills and stuff. He'd start contributing to the 401k later when he was making more money and could afford it. I explained to him that he was turning down free money, $3,000 a year, every year, for free. He literally just had to contribute his own $3,000, and they'd give him another $3,000 on top of it. That's a guaranteed 100% return instantly. There is no investment anywhere in the entire history of finance that will give you a guaranteed 100% return with zero risk. He still didn't do it. Said he couldn't afford to have that money taken out of his paycheck. Fast forward 5 years, he's still at the same company, still not contributing. He's left $15,000 on the table. $15,000 that his employer would have given him for free if he had just set up the contribution. Money that would have been growing in the market for 5 years on top of that. This is what I'm talking about when I say people leave money on the table because of lack of financial education. They don't understand what they're passing up. It's like someone offering you $1,000 and you're just like, no thanks, I'm good. Don't really need $1,000 right now. If your employer offers matching on a 401k or any retirement account, find out exactly how much they match and contribute at least enough to get the maximum match possible. This should be absolutely non-negotiable. This is free money. Take the money. I don't care if you have to cut back on other expenses to afford the contribution. Taking employer matching should be one of your highest financial priorities after building a basic emergency fund. Now, once you've grabbed that free money, here's where wealthy people focus next. And this is the thing that's secretly draining millions of people's finances every single month without them fully grasping how destructive it really is. They eliminate high-interest debt as quickly as possible. And I'm talking primarily about credit card debt, which is probably one of the most insidious wealth destroyers in modern finance. Credit cards can charge anywhere from 15% to 25% interest or even higher, and that interest compounds against you every single month that you carry a balance. Let me show you what this actually looks like in real numbers, because most people don't understand how bad this is until you spell it out. Say you have $10,000 in credit card debt at 20% interest. If you only make the minimum payment each month, which is usually about 2% of the balance, you'll spend over 20 years paying off that debt, and you'll end up paying approximately $18,000 in interest on top of the original $10,000. You'll pay $28,000 total for $10,000 worth of purchases that you probably don't even remember making. This is what keeps people trapped in that 2 a.m. anxiety spiral. They're making decent money, working hard, trying to do everything right, but so much of their income gets eaten by interest payments on debt that they can never actually get ahead. It's like trying to fill a bathtub while the drain is wide open. You can keep pouring water in, but the level never rises because it's all draining out. There are two main approaches to paying off debt, and both work depending on your personality. The first is called the avalanche method, where you pay off the highest interest rate debt first because that's costing you the most money. Mathematically, this saves you the most money over time. The second is the snowball method, where you pay off the smallest balance first regardless of interest rate just to get that quick win and see a debt disappear. Psychologically, this might keep you more motivated because you're seeing progress faster. I honestly don't care which method you use as long as you're aggressively paying down high-interest debt instead of just making minimum payments and hoping it eventually goes away. Any debt above about 5% interest needs to be treated like a financial emergency. This is a fire that's actively burning your wealth every single month. My personal rule is this: any debt above 5% interest, pay it off as fast as possible. Any debt below 5%, especially if it's attached to an appreciating asset like a mortgage or a business loan that's generating income, don't rush to pay it off early. Just make the regular payments and invest the difference in things that generate higher returns. And here's what starts to happen once you've knocked out that high-interest debt. You suddenly have more cash flow. Money that was going to credit card companies is now staying in your pocket. This is where the strategy shifts from defense to offense. Everything up to this point has been about plugging holes and making sure you don't sink. Now we start talking about making the ship go faster. This is where wealthy people invest in themselves to increase their income. And I know this sounds vague, like some motivational poster nonsense, but it's actually incredibly specific and practical. I'm talking about buying books that teach you valuable skills, taking courses that increase your expertise, getting certifications that qualify you for higher-paying positions, learning new abilities that let you charge more for your services, or starting a side business that creates additional income streams. Here's why this step comes now instead of earlier in the process. If you're barely making enough to cover your expenses, you can budget and optimize all day long, but there's a ceiling to how much you can save. You can only cut expenses so far before you hit the absolute minimum required to survive. I see comments all the time from people saying they're already doing everything they can. They've cut every possible expense. They're saving as much as humanly possible, but they're still stuck because they're making $3,000 a month and their essential expenses are $2,500. There's only so much you can do with $500 of margin, no matter how carefully you budget or how many coupons you clip. When people ask me what to do in that situation, my answer usually isn't about saving more money. It's about making more money. You've hit the wall of what's possible at your current income level. The only way forward is increasing that income, which might mean switching to a better-paying job, starting a side hustle that brings in extra cash, learning skills that command higher pay in the marketplace, or launching a business that creates new income streams. And here's why we waited until this point to focus on income growth. You've built your emergency fund, so you have a safety net if you take calculated risks. You've taken the employer matching, so retirement is getting funded automatically. You've dealt with high-interest debt, so you're not drowning in interest payments. Now you actually have some breathing room to invest in yourself without worrying about basic survival. This might mean spending $500 on a professional certification that qualifies you for jobs paying $15,000 more annually. or spending $1,000 on a course that teaches you skills that let you charge double your current rate, or spending $2,000 to start an online business that could generate an extra $1,000 a month. Wealthy people understand this principle instinctively. They view themselves as their own best investment. A course that costs $1,000 but increases your annual income by $10,000 is a 1,000% return in the first year alone. You will never ever find that kind of return in the stock market or real estate or any other traditional investment. Now, assuming you've done everything up to this point and you actually have some extra money beyond emergency funds and debt payments and employer matching, this is where wealthy people make a move that most people completely overlook. And it's one of the most powerful wealth-building tools that exists in the entire tax code. They contribute to a Roth IRA. And before your eyes glaze over because this sounds boring and technical, let me tell you a story that will show you exactly why this matters so much. I know two people who started working at the same company at the same time, making the same salary. Let's call them Sarah and Mike. Sarah started maxing out her Roth IRA contribution at age 25. Back then, the limit was lower, but she put in the maximum every single year from 25 to 35. That's 10 years of contributions, roughly $60,000 total that she put in. Then at 35, she stopped contributing completely. Never added another dollar. Just let that money sit and grow. Mike, on the other hand, didn't start contributing to his Roth IRA until he was 35. But once he started, he maxed it out every year for the next 30 years, all the way until retirement at 65. He contributed roughly 3 times as much actual money as Sarah did. Here's what happened. When they both turned 65, Sarah had approximately $890,000 in her Roth IRA. Mike had about $720,000. Sarah, who only contributed for 10 years and then stopped, ended up with more money than Mike, who contributed for 30 years. Why? Because she started 10 years earlier and gave her money more time to compound. But here's the part that makes this absolutely insane. Both of those amounts, Sarah's $890,000 and Mike's $720,000, are completely tax-free. When they withdraw that money in retirement, they don't owe the government a single penny in taxes on any of those gains. Compare that to a regular taxable investment account. If Mike had invested in a regular brokerage account instead of a Roth IRA, he'd owe capital gains taxes on all that growth. Depending on his tax bracket, he could easily lose $150,000 or more to taxes. The Roth IRA lets him keep all of it. This is what I mean when I say wealthy people understand the tax code and use every legal advantage available. They're not doing anything complicated or sketchy. They're just using the tools that are available to everyone, but that most people don't know about or don't bother using. A Roth IRA allows you to invest money you've already paid taxes on, and then everything that money grows into over decades is completely tax-free when you withdraw it. The compound growth happens tax-free. The dividends happen tax-free. Everything is tax-free, and when you're talking about potentially 40 years of compound growth, the tax savings become absolutely massive. This is another area where people leave enormous amounts of money on the table simply because they don't understand what's available to them. If you're eligible to contribute to a Roth IRA, you should be doing it as soon as you've handled the earlier steps in this blueprint. The long-term wealth-building power of tax-free compound growth is genuinely difficult to overstate. Now, only after you've done all of this, only after you've tracked your expenses and built an emergency fund and taken employer matching and paid off high-interest debt and invested in yourself and contributed to a Roth IRA, only then do you start putting money into other investments. This is where you might open a brokerage account and invest in index funds, or save for a down payment on rental property, or invest in starting or expanding a business. This is the stage where you're really building passive income and accelerating your wealth, and I know looking at all these steps might feel overwhelming, especially if you're starting from a position of having debt and almost no savings. But here's what you need to understand about this process. This isn't meant to be done in a week or a month or even a year. For some people, working through all these steps might take 5 years or even 10 years. And that's completely normal and completely fine. The timeline isn't what matters. What matters is that you're moving through these steps consistently instead of just staying stuck in that same cycle of living paycheck to paycheck and wondering why nothing ever changes. Focus on one step at a time. If you're at step 1 right now, just track your expenses for 60 days. Don't stress about emergency funds or retirement accounts yet. Master one step, then move to the next. Because here's what I've observed from studying wealthy people and their financial habits. Every single one of them follows some version of this blueprint. The specific investments might differ, the timeline might vary, but the fundamental structure is always the same. Track everything so you know where your money goes. Build safety nets so unexpected problems don't destroy you. Grab free money when it's offered. Eliminate debt that's eating your wealth. Invest in yourself to increase your income. Use tax-advantaged accounts. Then invest the rest strategically. The hardest part of all of this isn't any individual step. The hardest part is just starting. It's that initial decision to take control of your finances instead of just letting money happen to you while you hope things somehow get better on their own. 5 years from now, you're going to be in one of two positions. Either you'll still be lying awake at 2 a.m. doing mental math about bills, still stressed about money, still living paycheck to paycheck and wondering why you can never get ahead. Or you'll be sleeping soundly knowing you have an emergency fund, knowing you have retirement accounts growing, knowing you have options if something goes wrong. The choice you make tomorrow determines which version of yourself you become. The person who starts tracking their expenses tomorrow is a different person than the one who keeps ignoring where the money goes. The person who builds an emergency fund becomes someone who can handle problems instead of being destroyed by them. The person who follows this blueprint becomes someone who actually understands money instead of being confused and stressed by it. So there you have it. Managing money like the 1% isn't about secret strategies or complicated financial instruments or insider knowledge. It's about following this proven blueprint consistently over time. The steps are simple. The execution requires discipline and patience. But if you commit to this process, you'll find yourself in a completely different financial position 5 years from now. If you're currently staring at a bank account that makes you anxious instead of confident, start with step 1 tomorrow. Track your expenses for 60 days. See where your money is actually going. That awareness alone will change how you think about money, and that shift in thinking is the foundation for everything else. The person you become while following this blueprint is infinitely more valuable than any specific dollar amount in your account. Because once you develop these habits and this mindset, no one can take that away from you. You'll have the skills and knowledge to build wealth regardless of what happens in your career or the economy or anything else. And that's what actually managing your money like the 1% looks like.